Hello and welcome to episode 6 of JudgeStone. Today, October 15th, 2017, I am Justice, the founder of Judgment Gaming, joined by Owen Big O, the man of 1,000 win conditions, and and of course our generous and gracious host, he's coming back for us, Shinfitz. How are you guys doing today?
What's going on? Pretty good.
Yeah, can't complain.
Alright, so, good. I am glad to be here. I have worked about 12 hours today, so I am ready for some Hearthstone talk rather than work talk, so this is going to be very exciting for me personally. This is normally the part where I throw it over to Fitz, but I'm actually going to go ahead and take the lead for just a little bit here on this one, since I couldn't be here last week, so I'm greedy and need my camera time. Alright, so... we want to talk about a main issue today, so I'm going to kind of lay the groundwork for it, and then we'll get into the discussion. As some of you have probably seen, there was a bit of controversy in one of the losers matches at the HCT Summer Championships, where Coco Sasa was very animated, as he usually is. This particular match was against Baiza, and after a particularly... lucky, I guess, use of the Thrall Death Knight that he had stolen from her as a priest, because priests are thieves. He managed to change his Black Knight into a Prophet Velen, and he waved. And the immediate reaction from the caster was, did he just wave by? And people jumped on that, and it was seen as BM, because he was way ahead in that game, and this was a great, outcome from the hero power, changing it into a Prophet Velen, obviously great for a priest, which is looking to use that card anyway, and seen as him waving by to his opponent, as a way of, just being disrespectful. Thing about that is that was not exactly what happened. He did wave, but he said, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation since I don't speak Korean, even though it's only 2 letters, basically something along the lines of Velha, which is Hi Velen, which is a popular phrase used in Korean Twitch chats, which is basically, the same as when a player will draw patches. For example, they'll say Pat Ha, just to say hi to patches coming into their hand. I would like to thank Reddit user Necrofizzle for posting this for context. Which, hopefully gives a little bit more of a complete story in what he was doing. And the reason this post came to be is that this is actually a translation of Coco Sasa's apology to Baiza and the community as a whole for how he acted, and he felt that, maybe his actions were a little over the top. But the thing is, he was not intentionally trying to BM Baiza. He was not trying to be disrespectful. He was literally just memeing a little bit, as he does and is well known for. That's my dog saying hi. He is well known for being this way. He intended no disrespect to his opponent, and again, he was not waving even at his opponent. As he himself points out, it was 0-0 in a best-of-5 in a loser's match. So it's not even a situation where it really makes a whole lot of sense to BM, and it was certainly not his intention. Now, again, it was seen that way by a lot of people. And of course, the instant reaction by the caster of saying, did he just wave by? Misinterpreting what was happening. No fault of the caster, since, I imagine he, like many of us, are not as familiar with Korean Twitch meme culture. Can't really blame him for that. But that also fueled a lot of people becoming very upset and being very vocal and not nice to Coco Sasa on Reddit, which is shocking, I know, given how level-headed and understanding the internet communities generally are. But yeah, so it became a big thing. So we have 2 main topics we kind of want to talk about on this, which is first, how big a deal was this? Was it inappropriate? Even understanding the context in which he intended it. We'll start with that, and then I want to get into the second topic. But first, given this context and given what I've thrown out there, what is your guys' initial thoughts?
So I'll just kind of start, I guess. Is this really what we're talking about?
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah.
What is there, does this result in him, getting a loss, or is this just etiquette?
Etiquette.
Well, if it's just etiquette, then I give him a pass, honestly. Like even hypothetically he was, having poor manners or whatever, that's kind of his prerogative. I mean, like, one thing that I kind of don't really like, and I kind of feel like a lot of like high level tournaments take away, is like kind of like the fun interaction part of like playing face to face with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
There's this like, I guess this stigma that like you have to be like cold, emotionless robots when you're playing each other. Whereas, like, I think that if something, lucky happens, or if you, get a lucky draw or something, you're allowed to celebrate. I think that it's completely within the realm of like, okay gameplay. I mean, sure, there's a line to be crossed at some point, but I think that just when people sit there like cold, emotionless robots, it's just not really as entertaining. What I don't get is why anybody would jump down this guy's throat for something like that in the first place. I mean, surely the commentator probably fanned the flames a little bit inadvertently, but honestly, like, this isn't even really that big of a deal.
Right.
I think
even win?
I believe he did. Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. Oh, look, there's Orin now. Here's the interesting part, and I don't know how far down this rabbit hole we want to go, so I'm just gonna put the baseline out there, and I'll let you guys kind of decide how really in depth you want to get with this. There was some thought in the community that people's reactions may have been more intense due to the fact that his opponent was female, and that people may have felt the need to call him out on disrespecting a female, rather than just disrespecting an opponent. Whether that's true or not, whether that's driven, some of the comments that have been made, is impossible to know for sure. I will put this out there, and this is where I will give some amount of personal opinion before I toss it to you guys. Some of the Reddit comments or whatever were, calling him a virgin for doing this. And that, I think, is where it's definitely about gender, because that would never be something you would say even if you felt like he disrespected a male opponent. Virgin is never an insult that would have been thrown out there in that context. That is only an insult that is being used because his opponent was female. So clearly, for at least a few people, this was definitely part of the issue. There is the thought that it may have been the issue for a lot of people. Again, it's hard to say, and I'm not about to run down a full list of Reddit insults that are hurled at Coco Sasa, because I think that's just in poor taste. But there is the thought that may have inspired some additional vitriol from the community because of this.
I mean, honestly, like, he was just excited about his game. Like, can we just let the guys play Hearthstone and be done with it? Let the people play? I mean, like, yeah, there was sure, it's noteworthy that she is a woman playing in a, in an e-sport that's primarily dominated by male players, but I mean, that in of itself isn't the reason she's at the tournament. She's at the tournament because she's a skilled Hearthstone player.
Right.
So I don't think that her gender, I mean, in a perfect world, it should never even factor in at all, whether it's for controversy or, a commentary on her skill or how the player, because the thing is, at the end of the day, he didn't do it because he was being rude. He did it because he was excited about his game.
Right.
Her gender never factored into it. So, I mean, the fact that he even had to put out an apology in the first place is frankly ridiculous, because he was just celebrating his game. I mean, I totally understand why he's putting out an apology, because obviously his actions were misinterpreted, but I don't think that any action that he took, even watching the video several times, I don't think he did anything that was frankly remarkable at all. In fact, I even missed it the first time. Like, I missed what he did. So I don't think that it's really anything that should be brought to attention. I almost feel like talking about it at all kind of brings undue attention to it.
Right. So that's a good segue then. So let's use this, but stop talking about it specifically. Now we're going to get more to actually what you were talking about a little bit earlier, and this is what I really do want to dive into, which is that we do see with Hearthstone, for some reason, there is that expectation that no emotion should be shown at any time, that basically all players, especially while they're playing should all basically be indistinguishable from one another, based on their actions. That no one should, show any emotion. Oh, hello, Jace. Wow. All right, so my dog and your cat have made it clear that they want to be part of JudgeStone. That's okay. We're a pet-friendly show. So, whereas in other even card games, I mean, Magic the Gathering has had plenty of, big personalities. Even, from our time in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, we saw a lot of different players.
If I may just kind of segue
Sure.
there, though,
Mm-hmm.
this is actually a controversy, if you want to call it a controversy at all, that actually came up, I think it was, I want to say last year in the Magic community, in that we had another reputable player, celebrate, like, go ahead and throw a fist pump after winning a really critical match. And, a lot of people jumped down that person's throat for being, too celebratory. And, at the time, several of the other players kind of came down on, in my opinion, on the side, like, some people were, of course, of the opinion that, like, no, you should try and keep that because the other guy might feel bad. And then other people were like, yeah, he was just celebrating. I'm personally on the side of the matter that, you should be allowed to celebrate. I think the game is more exciting when people are allowed to express personality in their games.
Right, and I agree with you. I think as long as it's not getting to the point where it's, I guess, excessive, and it's not to the point where you're directly insulting or degrading in any way your opponent. If you're just excited about an outcome, I think a quick fist pump or, whatever, I think that's fine. I think if you start, getting up and dancing around the room and singing about, oh my god, I just won this game, over and over and over again, yeah, that would put your opponent in a bad place, right? But I think a quick, burst of emotion, that's human. And I think that trying to completely eliminate that, yeah, I personally am not super interested in watching a Hearthstone tournament played by robots. I like the idea of following individual players, and part of what draws people to individual players is their personality. If their personality can only show through while they're streaming or during a player interview, which usually lasts 2 minutes and is only softball questions, then I think that's a problem. As I said, as long as you're not directly disrespecting your opponent, as long as your celebration is not, overly excessive, yeah, I don't see why there should be a problem.
That's a really
with
fine
that.
line, though,
It is.
right?
It is.
Like,
It's very
so
subjective, for sure.
What's considered, too celebratory, right? Like, okay, fist pump.
I'll go in the completely other direction. I think that they should be able to do, I mean, not whatever they want. You can't, like,
assault the other person.
well, you know what? Maybe they should be able to insult. I take it back. Maybe they should.
No, I said assault.
He said
assault,
like
assault,
physically assault.
Yes, they shouldn't be able to assault them, but let them go crazy. I don't know if you guys are really big into poker, but if you ever heard,
I've heard a thing or two about the professional poker scene.
Yeah, I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that. I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand your connection to the professional poker scene, but there's this guy, Tony G, I believe his name is. Are you familiar with that guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, all he does is berate his opponents, and poker is a credible. It's definitely more credible than Hearthstone is, and they allow Tony G to just like rip into these guys, and people watch Tony to like either they love him and they want to watch him like berate someone when he wins, or they hate him and they want to watch him lose. Like either way, it's good for the community.
Well, I think that there's a big difference though between the poker community and the Hearthstone community, in that poker isn't targeted toward younger people,
right,
in general. Like hypothetically, poker is not a game that like children are playing, whereas Hearthstone and Magic try to maintain a family-friendly image, which I think would definitely influence their opinion as to whether or not they should allow trash talk at the table. I think from a pure entertainment standpoint, that certainly trash talk enhances things. There's a reason that, that kind of thing is like a prominent feature in like, wrestling or something. Like, it drives numbers. People want to see that, even if either they enjoy watching trash talk or they enjoy watching someone who's been talking trash get beat up. But I think that because Hearthstone tries to maintain a family-friendly atmosphere, they definitely want to, not encourage people to insult one another, and they want to try and keep it as, they want to keep like sportsmanship as high as possible, I guess. So, because I think ultimately that's what this is a question about. Was it good sportsmanship? And I think it's definitely a really fine line between where do you say, okay, that person was celebrating to the point where it's in poor taste. I mean, it's a hard thing, right? Because if you say like this kind of celebration is acceptable, but this one isn't, then it's like, well, who are you to say? At what point? It's just like it's an arbitrary line in the sand.
Right, because then like, is a parent gonna say, you know what, I don't want my child playing this game because I saw someone, celebrate and kind of rub it in the face of someone else? Like, what's next? Like cheerleaders? We can't have cheerleaders because on kids games because they're celebrating a win or a touchdown or something like that. Like,
I will tell you this. I think you're underestimating the overprotectiveness of some parents. Yes, there are definitely those out there that would say this is not encouraging the values that I want for my child. No, you may not watch this or you may not play this. I'm not saying it's a majority, but are they out there? Yeah, they are.
Point taken. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's someone out there or more than a few that are like that.
I mean, come on. You and I both know that there was a kid at the local card store that we went to who was, forced to quit Yu-Gi-Oh because of Injection Fairy Lily and her suggestive posing. So.
And that's the
but
internet version.
I think that's a little different than someone celebrating a win. Like that.
Well, because I think ultimately what they want to avoid, right, is like someone standing up suddenly and being like, "Yeah, in your face," to like an 8-year-old.
Right. Yeah.
They want to try and prevent like, the 30-year-old man standing up and be like, "Yeah, in your face."
And let's not pretend that wouldn't happen because again, we've kind of seen it.
But
that's the thing is like we have in other card games.
Yeah.
It does happen from time to time. So I understand the desire to try and maintain sportsmanship to a certain level. It
is tough. Yeah. It is tough, and as I said, it is extremely subjective. There is no 100% always, this is definitely okay, and this is definitely not, and this is exactly where the line is, and everyone is clear on that. It's incredibly subjective. So, yeah, what one person might see as totally fine, another one might see as, way over the line. So it is hard. So I guess then there's the question of, we're all in agreement of, we don't want robots. We don't want people with, no personality able to show through at the table, right? I think we're all pretty much on that same page. We don't want to see nothing because that's boring. We want there to be people playing. So I guess then that's our question of how do you still understand that, yes, this is a game that is supposed to be able to be marketed to children, and you have to maintain some level of sportsmanship for that to still be possible. So how do you go about doing that while still not completely trying to censor players or, have people come jump down their throat at the first sign of any sort of celebration or anything like that?
Well, I think you can make it very clear cut by just saying, like, look, celebration's fine, as long as it's not, like, too loud or obnoxious, Insults are definitely off the table. Anything that's like remotely aggressive or slanderous toward the opponent is definitely off the table. But I think that if you want to like stand up, pump a fist, give a buddy a hug, like I think those are completely reasonable things. I think it's up to the opponent to understand that if the opponent is celebrating because something fortunate happened, it's not because they're trying to rub it in their face. It's because they're excited that something fortunate happened for them. So I think it has less to do with policing the activity and more to do with educating the players and understanding that, like, hey, listen, like, if I roll a Velen off my Transmute Soul, and I, say hi, like, to my Velen, it's not a commentary on my opinion of your gender stereotype in our card game. It's not my attempt to say, like, bye, as in you're out of here, I'm going to eliminate you from the tournament. But, I mean, even if that's how he actually feels, I think it's I don't want to like blame the victim necessarily, but I think it is also important for all of the players to maintain a level of, perspective as to
Right.
the circumstances.
I will say to her credit, at least that I've seen, I haven't seen anything publicly from Biza saying that she had a problem with it. This is
Because she didn't
generally from the
notice.
community.
Like that's the thing. She's sitting there looking at her screen. It's not like she has a direct camera feed on what he looks like. So she only would have noticed if she looked up over her monitor to see if he was waving his hand. So, because remember the way that those tournaments are set up, they're sitting across from one another, but it's kind of a bit of a ways away, and they're kind of basically sitting in a cubicle, in a way.
I mean, if you look, you can see your opponent, but I mean, I understand your point.
Yeah, like she's more than likely focusing on the game because things just went, it went really poorly for her. So she's probably trying to focus on how to, what are my outs?
Right.
Which I think is probably a more productive thing to think about during gameplay. But that's the thing, is like, there definitely is value in trying to psych out the opponent. That's why poker players do it, in part. Mm-hmm. It's not just because they have personality, it's because they know that by insulting people or by, talking trash or just like rambling on and on, it throws people off their game. And you don't ever get that with Hearthstone.
Yeah, I will say it's a little bit different. At least in my experience, I even when playing Yu-Gi, I very rarely had someone that was like consistently trying to trash talk. I'm not saying never, because it happened, but it was pretty rare. I will say that trading card / collectible card games, I think, while it still uses cards as poker does, I think it's still a somewhat different environment as far as that kind of thing is concerned. I mean, maybe you guys disagree, and if so, that's fine. You can let me know. I will say that I think it has less of a place. It's also a matter of, I mean, in poker you always want to be paying attention to everything, yes, but there are sometimes where you're just, immediately pre-flop, you fold your hand, and you can spend the rest of your time just studying your opponents, and you don't have any other decisions to make until the next hand is dealt. Whereas, you can be studying your opponents, looking for tells, looking for patterns, that kind of thing, and still something that good poker players do, but you can spend your time doing that. And if part of your game of working on your opponents is talking, then that's fine. Whereas with a card game, it's you versus your opponent. There is no, okay, I'm out of this one. I don't have to focus on anything I'm doing until such and such a time. So I think that dynamic does change it a little bit, at least in my opinion.
I don't think so. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the thing is that, like, once you're an adequate enough player, you can make play decisions while still jabbering on about whatever.
Sure.
And that's going to vary on skill level, certainly, but there are certainly a number of players out there who have the capability to carry on a conversation while they're to carry on a conversation while they're able, while they're jabbing along. It's not something that it's not like in poker where you have off time between hands. You're still able to have that conversation and to jab at the opponent who may be compelled to respond to you. It's, I think, part of the same reason why players spam emotes in the game before when things are going well, because they know it's going to put people off their game,
right? And
they've already made their play decisions before they even start doing that. It's not like I can only think about one thing at a time.
No, sure, and that's not really my argument. I was saying it's a different dynamic, and it's also a different culture, which I think is a large part of it. So, I mean, let me ask you then, if you're playing an in-person Hearthstone tournament, if you're sitting across from your opponent and they're just constantly talking to you and like trying to insult you or whatever, are you okay with that?
Yeah, because it's up to me whether or not I want to engage with that.
I mean, I think nobody is okay with it. Like, yeah, this guy is being like a jerk. But should he be eliminated from the tournament for that? I don't think so. I think with anything competitive, whether it be Hearthstone, whether it be football, whether it be Yu-Gi-Oh, whether it be poker, anything competitive will have that kind of ego. There's going to be someone with an ego. There's going to be someone who's going to be a jerk. And there's going to be someone who does something like that. I don't think it should be... Like I said, there's definitely a line. I don't know where exactly that line is. Like, as soon as you start talking about maybe sex or race or sexual orientation, stuff like that.
Yeah, at some point it crosses into hate speech, but I think as long as everybody can agree that we shouldn't participate in hate speech for, our game of cards, right. I think that more or less it should be fine no matter what they're doing, because ultimately it's up to me to engage with that. Now, from a business perspective, that perhaps creates a unsavory tournament environment for people that, for your game that you want to ultimately be inviting to everybody. But I think that luckily it's not our decision to make. We don't have to be the ones to decide what's over the line, what isn't. What we do need, though, is we need to, as a community, agree to stop trying to make controversies when there just simply isn't one there. He made a offhanded hand gesture for essentially a joke because he was pleased at his random outcome. Right. I think that if you can't do that, then, what's the purpose of having them sit in front of one another in the first place?
I agree.
So, now, interestingly enough, when you have players Skyping in, essentially, to play their tournaments, in those situations, the players don't necessarily see what the other person's doing. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the benefits of having remote tournament access as opposed to having live tournament access. Do you feel that, so for instance, let's say you and I are playing, Fitzroy, and, we're playing a game. Now, I can't see what you're doing, and you can't see what I'm doing, but perhaps the viewers can see both of our webcams. Okay. Do you think then, and that in those situations, it's more appropriate to be a little bit more animated with your, with either your talking or your, hand motions or whatever, what have you, because the opponent can't see it or interact with you in any way?
So, okay, so your question is, it's okay for me to be more
animated,
right? Yeah, I think whatever the venue is, I guess that's fine. I would say. Now, I think you should be free to do kind of whatever you want, but there should be consequences. So if you do go across that line, if it does go into hate speech, then you take a game loss or something like that.
Or match loss, or you're ejected from the tournament. I think that ultimately the line here is, at what point does your opponent feel unsafe to participate? I think that's ultimately what we're kind of trying to dance around, and what we're eventually getting at is that your speech should be fine, your action should be fine, provided your opponent doesn't feel threatened. Doesn't feel, super uncomfortable, I guess, to so much to the point where they wouldn't want to sit down to play you.
So are we then talking about a matter of public perception, or are we talking about a matter of it's up to each individual competitor, because everyone has a different threshold for that? So is it then up to the opponent to call a judge or whoever, some official, and say that I'm uncomfortable with, the way that my opponent is talking to me?
Well, I think once it goes beyond, once it goes beyond the game, that's a really good indicator. Like if someone says, that was an awful play or something like that, or you suck. You don't really want to be, you don't want to create an environment where people are berating other people, but at the same time, if it's not going into it's a girl, I'm gonna win, or something like that. Once it gets beyond the game, then that's when definitely action should be taken.
Right, but here's the question. So everybody has a different threshold for where they feel they can no longer, participate, whether it be threatened or, disrespected to the point of it's affecting their emotional state, whatever. So, for example, any of us, opponent might just say, oh my god, you suck, and we can just be like, whatever, you'll see, I'm still going to win. Whereas someone else, over several, turns or several minutes or whatever, constantly hearing the opponent berate them, even if it's not in a way that's over that particular line, where it's not into hate speech, they still might feel that this is not a welcoming environment for them anymore, and they might regret the time that they took to prepare for this tournament and to travel to it, whether it be near or far, and to spend the time doing this, and they might feel that this has become a hostile environment for them, and they might, someone who doesn't have the same constitution that we have, who doesn't have as thick a skin, they might feel the way that we would feel if it did go over that line. So the way we would feel if it didn't, someone else might feel it, and how do you decide for somebody else? I'm not saying that you guys are right or wrong, I'm just putting the question out there. How do you decide for someone else when they should or should not feel that this is a hostile environment now? Because you or I might look at what someone says and say, that's not that big a deal. But to their opponent, they might not feel that way. To them, it might be a big deal, and it might not just be, they can't handle a little trash talk. To them, it might feel that bad. What do you do about that?
Well, because I think that ultimately you need to... Because that's why these companies take such a hard stance, because they know that if trash talk's a prevalent thing, it's not going to create a welcoming tournament environment, and that ultimately hurts the game. So I think that ultimately, if the discussion is, again, you shouldn't really be insulting your opponent. That's generally considered poor etiquette. I understand in most sporting, in most sports and, other, other games like poker, trash talk is an accepted part of the environment. But there's a reason they don't have, a lot of children playing those games. And I'm not just talking about legal reasons, but those games aren't welcoming in the same way. Whereas I think that Hearthstone and other card games as well, they kind of need to be able to protect that kind of, family-friendly environment because it's their business model at the end of the day.
Right.
So I think that ultimately the question of like what kind of actions should be allowed, I think that if it's just like a celebratory thing, or even if it's just kind of like poor BM, as long as you're not like flipping them the bird or something, that's fine. As far as verbal is concerned, I think that any sort of insult to the opponent or trash talk or anything like that, we have to as a community agree to stay away from it, just because the inclusion of having it in your community, I think, hurts the game overall. So while some people may certainly be able to, handle it individually, and maybe it'll happen on a local level, I think we have to agree that whenever we take it to the global or national stage, that we have to leave those kind of things behind, because we need to be able to make sure that the front-facing aspect of our game is one where it's welcoming. It looks like a, community of people who want to, play together, who have a mutual respect for one another. And I think, again, kind of at the end of the day, that's what we really need to make sure is we just need to make sure the players respect each other. Whether it's, even if it's a matter of, having a little bit of dialogue here or there, I think that as long as all of the players agree to respect one another in the, in the game and outside of the game, I think that, that's kind of like the golden rule. We're ultimately just trying to create an architecture that allows players to participate and feel respected by one another.
Right, and I think that whole thing about inclusion is important, because I mean, even if you look at the terminology that's used, we talk about, when people go, they go to a tavern, right? That feeling of togetherness. You go to a fireside gathering, Oh,
What is this?
okay. Thank you for the sound effects to illustrate my point. So again, like we talk about a fireside gathering, like that conjures an image of people, a tight-knit group of friends all, coming together for like this event, like, and that's what they're going for. That's what they want. You look at the last cinematic, that girl who got transported to the tavern, and it was everybody is included, genders, races. I mean, obviously in Warcraft lore, race might mean a different thing than it does, for us, but the idea is still the same. And they do want that feeling of inclusion. So I guess to your point, Owen, what we're saying is we don't mind some personality. We do want, the ability to do something like Coco Salsa did. It's not really a big a deal. We just don't want anything that is, I guess, directly disrespecting your opponent. Is that
Precisely.
fair?
But we're taking it to a point where, like we're everyone agrees that no one wants insults to the other player, but now we're taking it and we're making everything sterile, because just like you said, people can take it to the umpteenth level. They can say, oh, someone hugging someone else, or or laughing after the win, like not laughing at them, but
right.
oh, you know what I mean? They may look at that and then say, he's disrespecting me, or whatever the case may be. Like we're taking it to a level that someone said something that I don't even know what it means, but like it feels like it wasn't
it wasn't even directed at his opponent.
Like it feels like it wasn't something disrespectful, but people are jumping down his throat because they foster this community that is not just one player being respectful to the other player. It's sterile.
It's intolerant of any sort of emotion.
You're supposed to just be quiet, shake their hand after, and walk off. And that's not like a tavern. Like in a tavern, people fight, and even the characters in Hearthstone diss one another sometimes.
Right. So let me ask. I think we all agree that we want some sort of middle ground there. We might not all be on exactly the same line, but we all agree we want some sort of middle ground. So I guess, Fitz, what's your ideal scenario then of still creating a welcoming environment that still takes into account the target audience, but allows for some level of self-expression, I guess?
I'm pretty like libertarian on this issue. Actually, I just think it should, like, as long as it's not insulting the other person. If the other person is directly insulted, then there should be a consequence. But other than that, that's fine. Let them high five, let them laugh, let them, whatever the case may be. That's fine with me.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think that like ultimately there isn't really a concise set of rules to cover this because of the sheer scope of what we're trying to police in the first place. I think it's important to just leave it up to, in part, the judge staff's interpretation. I think that there's nothing wrong with saying that
I don't know,
the general.
that sounds dangerous to me.
No, but let me hear me out.
Okay.
Essentially just saying like, look, as long as you're not directly insulting the opponent, it's fine. And then if the opponent says I was insulted, then we have to have some sort of arbiter here, the judge staff, decide whether or not the player took it over the line or not, because ultimately it's going to be their call anyways. I don't think that we can be specific enough to find what is and is not an insult and still not have people abuse those rules as written, because as long as there's wiggle room, people will push the bar. So I think it's important to leave a level of wiggle room in the rules themselves. It's kind of like in golf, right? Where when you pick up your ball, like during a golf tournament, if you pick up your ball, for the other person to have their stroke, it's your duty to put it back exactly where you initially picked up the ball, because you don't want your ball to impact the other person's stroke. Now, there is going to be a level of human error there, because it's going to be impossible for our human eyeballs to determine the exact point in space where the ball was initially picked up. There's going to be some variation. At what point do we penalize them? Do we, how far away from the point can it be? Because if you put a number attached to that, where, okay, the ball has to go exactly where it was, deviation of 3 inches or something, well, there are going to be people who are going to put it 3 inches closer to the hole because they know what the rules are. The rules are more effective. In this case, I think the rules are more effective just saying, put it back and then, where it's supposed to be. And then if there's some concern about whether or not it was close enough, we have the judges who have a level of authority in this matter. So I think that you do yourself more of a disservice by trying to spell out the exact rules for what you can and can't do, rather than just having the general statement of put the ball back or don't disrespect your opponent, and then having a arbiter come in and decide whether or not you've taken it over the line. Because then you're going to have hopefully have less people out there who are going to try and push the bar.
I think that's generally fair. So I think we're landing basically on what we'd like to see is celebrate, do what you want, don't directly insult your opponent. And then if there are any concerns past that point, then it's up to some sort of, as you said, judge, arbiter, whatever.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is like the audience is trying to police it as well, and it's like,
yes, which you're never going to stop, no matter what the rules say.
Yeah, so it's like,
but in this case, there are no rules. Like,
right?
Is there anything spelled out? Like,
I'm sure there probably is
did,
somewhere. Right? I mean, as far to the best of my knowledge, he didn't do anything that was against the rules. No, I'm sure there are rules somewhere. I imagine again, jumping across the table and punching your opponent in the face. Probably there's got to be some sort of repercussions for that. But I don't know how. Yeah, well, hard to compete in a Hearthstone tournament when you're in jail. I don't know. I guess it depends on their Wi-Fi and if they let you have your phone or your tablet. But anyway, I don't know exactly what the rules are. I said I'm sure there's something in place. But yeah, a lot of it does come down to community, interpretation of what happened, and you're never going to stop that. And I'm not suggesting that if we have some better rules in place that suddenly everyone's going to agree about everything. Of course not. But I do think that maybe having some sort of loose guideline like that where it's basically saying two things officially. Because right now, I don't think we have anything official, right? So we're saying two things officially based on what we have all more or less agreed on. Blizzard is taking the official stance of A, it is not okay to go out there and insult your opponent, and directly, disrespect them and all that. But B, it is okay to be a human being and to show some emotion in these situations, and we don't have a problem with that. And I think that whether it's exactly the way that we phrased it or if they have a more effective way of getting that point across, I think that saying those two things officially, in whatever way they end up doing it, if they were to do it, I think is important. Because, again, we've talked about the audience. We don't want Hearthstone to become somewhere where parents don't feel safe, letting their children participate, or is it where those people who don't deal well with constantly being told they suck and how horrible they are, feel like they can't be a part of the community anymore. I think we agree we don't want that, and Blizzard certainly doesn't want that. So I think, part of what they're saying is, no, we don't want that. We still want this to be an inclusive environment in our tournaments. Anyone should feel, safe to participate in Hearthstone. That's number one. But number two, the other side of that is that within those bounds, we don't want players to feel like they can't be themselves. And I said, whether it's in exactly the guidelines that we've laid out here on the show, or as I said, if they have a different way of doing that. But I think establishing those 2 points in whatever way they end up doing it, I think would be ideal, at least for me personally. And I think it would be good for the community and the game as a whole to understand that this is not a game where it is okay to just completely go off on your opponent. No Phil Hellmuth-esque rants, probably, I think is fair. But at the same time, you should not feel like if you even think about breathing wrong, that there's going to be some rules infraction, and you're going to get a game loss or something like that. So I think establishing those two ends of the spectrum, I think would be a good starting point, at least.
Yeah, because it's like at school, if someone's playing football, and I know parents will try to control this, but are kids saying you suck or, whatever the case? Of course they are. Like, I don't know. It just seems so futile to try and police something like this.
I think that's where...
If someone...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if someone's directly insulting someone and it's caught, then you reprimand that person and move on. But to try and, like, call out someone who's celebrating, I think is... It's silly, but what were you going to say?
No, I think we're all on that same page, that just for a celebration like that is, there's no reason to make a big deal out of that. What I was going to say is, and it's something that I very quickly mentioned earlier, and I'll kind of come back to the point, is that culture plays a large part in it. If something has been a certain way for a long time, it's easier to accept that it is that way. That is a generally true statement. That does not only apply to sports or esports or anything. That is just general human mentality. So if for the last 100 whatever years, people know if you play football, trash talk's gonna be a part of it, they know this going in, this is accepted, whether you like it or not, you know what you're signing up for. If the culture of card games is less about that, and when you go to a card game tournament, you don't expect that, then it can surprise more people and it can be harder for them to deal with it. Now, I'm not saying that it should be one way or the other. I'm not saying therefore we should never have X or we should always have Y. I'm just saying that the public perception is going to be somewhat affected by their view of the overall culture and what has been. Now, obviously, Hearthstone or esports as a whole do not have the history that major professional sports have, baseball, football, whatever. So obviously we have a lot less history to look back on and to use to inform our opinion of the future. But I think that's kind of the point, actually, is that we're still at a stage where this can be molded, and where we can... So. You don't think so? Why not?
I don't think so. Because it's just competition. It's like that for football. It's like that for rock, paper, scissors. It's like that for video games. It's like that when any one person is against another one person. It's like that in chess. It's like that in anything where you're competing against. Oh, definitely.
In chess? Oh, I mean, that wasn't like I wasn't challenging. I honestly don't know. Is that actually part of the culture in chess?
Yeah, well, for people to berate the other person.
Well, are we talking casual, or are we talking on a professional, say, national level?
So when you're talking about like in a chess tournament, you don't really see that because is it policed? No. Is it like do you get an infraction for doing something like that? I've never seen it. But when you go to like when you go to like wherever people are playing chess or something like that, trash talk happens all the time. And if it's not a national tournament, if it's just like a regional or our version of a regional, people do that all the time, especially out in New York and places like that. But I think it's just a matter of competition. Whenever one human is against another human, that is going to be there.
I agree.
That is the culture.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think my point was more about, and it's like that Owen I mentioned earlier too, of what do you want the face of your competition to look like. So I agree with you. At just like a random fireside gathering, yeah, I expect there to be some level of trash talk or whatever. I think we're saying more because Blizzard is not controlling the fireside gathering, right? That's just a thing that's happening. When we're talking about the biggest events that they have, and this is one of the biggest events of the year, and again, we all agree that we have no problem with what Kokosasa did, but we're saying generally speaking, at your biggest events, at the ones that are giving the most exposure to your game and to your competitive scene, is the expectation there maybe a little bit different than what the expectation is, at a random fireside gathering with, 10 people or, random people, whatever. And I think the answer there has to be, yeah. You think it should not be? I don't know if I heard you correctly. I'm sorry.
I don't think it should be.
You think there should be no difference between the two, or?
I don't think that there should be, because I think that you have to represent what people are actually getting into. If you have a front-facing, like let's say your front-facing tournament has people acting very cold and sterile with their actions, but people go to a fireside gathering and they have people who are trash talking and shouting and whooping and hollering, like that kind of dissonance is not healthy for the game either. I think that you kind of have to set the correct expectations for your players or your prospective players or people who might be interested, that if trash talk or if celebratory or being celebratory is something that happens in your community, you need to be able to show that, because that's not a downside. That's not a bad thing that people are celebrating, because it means that they're investing in your game and that they care about it. So I think that if that's something that is happening in your games, you should not be penalizing it or jumping down their throat. You should be celebrating it yourself, because it means that people care enough to actually have an emotional response to it. It's not entertaining to watch somebody sit up on the screen and just mechanically play games. But if you see somebody, have a fleck of emotion, you want to be able to celebrate that. You want your commentator to go up for the post-match interview and be like, "Hey, I saw you do a fist pump there. You must be really stoked. What was going through your mind?" It shouldn't be, "Oh, are you really sure that you should have, that fist pump looked a little bit aggressive. Are you sure that was really the best thing to do?"
No, I don't disagree with you. I think I'm talking more of when we're getting past. I think, as I said, we're all on the same page. Celebration, as long as it's not directly insulting, as long as you're not celebrating by jumping at your opponent and telling them how horrible they are and all that. I think we're all on the same page. Celebration is fine. I was talking more on when it got further than that, of when it did get more towards as we were talking before, of the constant trash talking, of the disrespecting your opponent, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm saying.
You have to set the right expectations, is what I'm saying.
Right. So that's why I want to make sure why I understood what you're saying. So you're saying basically the guidelines that we have laid out already of what we would like to see, where celebration is fine, we just don't want to see overly directly insulting your opponent. That you want to set those same expectations for both your fireside gatherings and your big tournaments. Is what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly.
Right, because I think that it's important that your big tournaments have the same culture.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much with you on that.
Because then it feels like, let's say let's say it is, we don't allow people to do that kind of stuff, but someone really wants to berate someone else, but Blizzard is saying, you know what, we're going to have an environment where your child won't be berated. You think that that person won't just go on to stream and just do the same thing there? There really is no escaping it. I mean, I guess you could say, well, this doesn't happen at our events, but that if that parent is that protective, then they'll see the same thing on Twitch and not want them to play. They'll see the same thing on YouTube and not want them to play. There's no escaping it.
Well, I mean, I agree. You can't censor every single individual who's ever going to play the game or choose to stream. I think the idea... What?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, you don't need to, though, because ultimately... Because the thing is, too, something else that isn't really addressed is that, let's say you are the kind of person who gets really animated when you play. Let's say you are the kind of person who, engages in a bit of trash talk here or there. I think that if that's something that happens in your local fireside gatherings, and that's something that you engage on a regular basis, if you try and take that away when you step up to the professional stage, it almost creates an additional barrier of entry, in a way, in that it purposefully starts to screen out those kind of players. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately it's something that we really shouldn't even be spending much time thinking about in the first place, because I think that ultimately the culture itself of the game will kind of self-correct. This isn't something that really needs to be policed. There's a reason that Blizzard doesn't make official statements about this. It's not just because they're poor with their communication, although they are. It's more so about the fact that the other players at the tournament set the expectations for how people are going to conduct themselves. I think it's our job as a community to send the message that we think it's okay to have a little bit more personality in that.
Right. Yeah, because then the guy who's a jerk, everyone will know that guy's a jerk, and then, either
and then he's a heel,
and then he's a heel, right? Then he becomes Tony G, where people pay to see this guy lose, or, I don't know.
Or he becomes a Conor McGregor, where people pay to watch him trash talk and win.
Precisely. Right. And when, if you look at things like boxing, boxing was awful up until Muhammad Ali, because he was good and he trash talked. Then it was awful until Mike Tyson. He was good and then he trash talked. And then it was awful until Mayweather, he's good and he trash talks. So I don't know. I don't really see it as a negative, and I think that the community does have enough good personalities that they'll kind of label that guy as that guy, and kind of support the person who was on the other end of the beratement, if beratement is a word.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Okay, so I think it's fair to say we have a lot of same general ideas, but as is often the case in any community, I think all three of us are slightly differing in exactly how we'd like to see that be implemented, but I think that's okay, because that's kind of the point, is that there is no one definitely correct way to go about things, which is kind of what we led in with. So we all agree we'd like to see some personality. We might disagree on exactly how far we'd like to see that go, but that's fine. And that's kind of the point. So, it's basically what we all agree on is when even the slightest hint of emotion is cause for a tirade of negative comments, we probably have an issue. Right? And that's something that maybe the community as a whole needs to start rethinking a little bit. Because as I said before, I don't want to watch robots playing Hearthstone. That's not fun to me. I want to see people, actual people. I am a real human being. I would like to see other real human beings. Is that exactly how far we want them to take it is where the three of us might see things slightly differently, but we all agree that we want to see human beings playing Hearthstone. I think is a fair statement.
You know what? You know what's an interesting thought? is to see a machine play Hearthstone.
Well,
Like,
there.
you know
I
how
mean,
they have
there are bots that play the ladder sometimes.
there are bots in
Oh
ladder.
yeah, it was especially prevalent before with some of the. There, I know there were a lot of secret paladin bots
Some of the more
back in the
linear,
day.
some of the more linear decks
Yeah.
existed on the ladder.
Yeah, basically anything that
serious?
mostly looks to like mostly just play on curve and be very aggressive. There have been bots for it. Yeah. There's been like secret paladin bots, there's been pirate warrior bots. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're definitely worse than an actual human being playing the same deck, but they exist. Yeah, unfortunately.
Doesn't matter.
I think it would be
Some of
cool
those
to have.
decks.
You know how in chess they do have like a robot that's like grandmaster
A
level.
supercomputer.
Yeah, supercomputer basically, and have a Hearthstone kind of robot. I think that would be cool.
Top
But anyway.
legend Hearthstone bot.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I got you.
I'm not saying that Judgment Gaming should look into investing in this technology, but
If we
I am
did-
saying that I would pay. But what I am saying is that I would include myself among the number of people who might pay to play that kind of game.
I think I would as well.
just for the yeah. I mean, there was in chess. I think there was in Go also. There was a computer program that was able to beat one of the best players in the world. They're doing that, and yeah, there is some pride. And once you've established that the computer is at that level, that it is, one of, if not the best, players, that it can beat one of the best players in the world. I think there is some pride in then beating that computer program. Right. So.
And I think it would be especially interested in Hearthstone because you could just give instead of assigning it a deck, you could just kind of like give it this is the range of legal cards and have it like construct a deck and then play with that deck.
Mm.
Like this is the most optimal deck.
That would be.
I don't know if that kind of technology.
That's a
exists.
really.
I think
That seems like a really roundabout way. I'm just saying, guys, that seems like a really roundabout way to install Skynet.
Well, you can't just tell people you're doing it. I mean,
We're not saying that they're gonna. That's a good point.
It's like first we're starting with trying to crack the ladder with robot technology, and next thing you know, it's hacking the Pentagon and launching nuclear weapons. It's a slippery slope, guys. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, there's very little middle ground from one point to the other. Yeah, it's just inevitable at that point, really.
Hits legend, and at that point,
Yeah.
nuclear Hulk.
Well, hold on a second. Does a John Connor exist though?
I mean, would we know?
Because if there is, then there's no problem, right?
Well, I wouldn't say no problem. Let's not pretend that like the Terminator caused no issues for anybody ever.
I mean, didn't the timelines reset pretty much every time? So technically, there
we're
were no
not.
issues
We're not.
Oh man, we're getting way too deep now. Okay, I think we've about hit our limits here. Fitz, you wanna wrap us up before we start trying to wonder if we're in a parallel universe?
Was a parallel universe part of? Anyway.
Look.
Yes. What?
Please. I as I mentioned, I've worked 12 hours today. I can only handle so much, going down this route. So please, yes.
Got it. All right. Well, you can check us out at jdggaming.com. We also have a Twitter, a Facebook, and a YouTube. And we are doing another match. Big O, do you remember when that was supposed to be?
This coming Thursday, hopefully. Schedule's
Thursday. I don't believe the champ is playing, but
we'll
we're gonna have, two
update through
runner-ups.
social media when we have the details of it. Because I will tell you right now, I will be out of town on Thursday, so we'll not be able to host the stream.
okay.
We'll figure it out.
guys.
Yeah, but we will keep you guys updated on social media, so make sure to follow us on there if you're not already.
All right,
All right,
sounds
cool.
good.
All right, you guys.
Well-
Don't get beat up out there.
Yep, and on behalf of Judgment Gaming, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next week.
Thank you guys. Have a good night.